Today we're zeroing in on something lots of you have asked about, getting to grips with layers in Adobe Photoshop Elements.
Yeah, it's a big one. And we've looked at quite a few sources, some YouTube tutorials, articles, specific videos on things like merging and opacity.
Right, we've got stuff from Photoshop Elements, custom tutorials, HTG Photo, Michael Bulow, Rick Peterson, and a good overview from Geeks for Geeks.
And the goal, really, is to understand how these layers work and why they're so powerful, especially for, editing without messing things up permanently.
Exactly. So let's kick things off. What is a layer in, simple terms?
Think of it like clear plastic sheets stacked up. You draw on one sheet, put another on top, draw something else.
You see the whole picture through the stack.
Precisely. But the key is you can change one sheet, one layer, without touching the others. It's separate.
Okay, so that brings us to this idea of non-destructive editing. Why is that such a big deal?
Well, imagine you want to try painting something onto your photo instead of doing it right on the picture.
You do it on a new, clear layer on top.
Exactly. And if you decide, nah, don't like that, you hide that layer or delete it.
And the original photo underneath is still perfectly fine.
Untouched. It gives you freedom to experiment, You're not locked into every single change.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like a safety net. So, Geeks for Geeks mentioned different types of layers. What are the main ones we should know?
Okay, yeah. First up is the basic image layer. That's just where your photo or parts of it sits, your main content layer, basically.
Got it. The photo itself.
Then you have fill layers. These are pretty neat for adding solid colors or gradients across an area.
Gradients, like smooth fades between colors.
Right. And the cool thing is they automatically come with a mask, so you can control exactly where that color or gradient appears, and they stay editable.
Editable meaning you can change the color later.
Yep. Change the color, the gradient, the mask, everything. Very flexible.
Nice. What else?
Adjustment layers. These are really powerful. They let you adjust things like brightness, contrast, color, saturation.
Okay.
But they do it without changing the actual pixels on the layers below them. Yeah. It's like applying a filter that you can turn on, turn off, or tweak anytime.
Wow. Okay, so you can experiment with different looks completely non-destructively.
Totally. Huge advantage. Then there are smart objects. Now, this gets a bit interesting in Elements.
How so? I thought smart objects were mainly a full Photoshop thing.
They are, officially. Elements doesn't have the exact same feature, but one of the tutorials we watched from Photoshop Elements custom tutorials showed a really clever workaround.
Oh, a workaround. Tell me more.
Yeah. See, normally if you take a regular image layer and resize it smaller, then bigger again, it gets blurry, right? Because you're losing pixel information.
Right, it gets pixelated.
But their method is open a new blank file, then drag your photo from the photo bin into that file. It creates the layer, but it has this tiny little icon on the thumbnail.
And that icon means?
It means Elements is trying to preserve the original image data, sort of like a smart object. So if you resize it down and then up again, it often snaps back sharp when you confirm the change.
Huh. That's a great tip. So it helps avoid that immediate blurriness when resizing.
It does. But there's a catch.
Always a catch.
Well, sometimes. If you want to apply certain filters or effects, maybe like a Gaussian blur or some color adjustments, Elements might tell you need to simplify layer first.
And simplifying that removes the smart object-like behavior.
Exactly. It converts it back to a regular pixel layer, so you lose that special resizing protection. It's a trade-off you have to make sometimes.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
So back to the layer types from Geeks for Geeks.
Right. We also have shape layers. These are for drawing shapes, rectangles, circles, custom shapes using the shape tools.
And these aren't made of pixels initially.
Correct. They're vector-based. Think of them as defined by math, not dots. The big advantage is you can scale them up or down as much as you want, and they stay perfectly sharp. No jagged edges.
Ah, like logos or graphic elements.
Precisely. And they remain fully editable. You can change shape, the color, anything. And finally, type layers for adding text.
Also vector.
Also vector by default, yeah. So you can change the words, the font, the size, make it huge, and it stays crisp.
Okay, so a mix of pixel layers for photos and vector layers for sharp graphics and text. Makes sense. Now, managing all these, that's the layers panel, right?
Absolutely. The layers panel is your control center, usually sits over on the right.
And Geeks for Geeks mentioned a search function. That sounds handy.
Oh, incredibly handy, especially if you end up with dozens of layers. You can search by the layer name you gave it, or even filter by type. Show me just the text layers or just the adjustment layers.
It saves a lot of scrolling, I bet.
Definitely. Then you've got creative options in the panel itself. like blending modes.
Ah, yes, modes like multiply, screen, overlay.
Those are the ones. There are about 27 of them in Elements. They change how the selected layer interacts visually with the layers underneath it. You get some really interesting effects by playing with these.
And opacity is there too, right? Just making a layer more see-through.
Yep, opacity controls the transparency of the entire layer. 100% is solid, 0% is invisible. Anything in between lets the lower layers show through.
Now, we saw a video from Michael Bullough that made a distinction between opacity and something called fill. What's the difference there?
That's a good point. It's subtle but important. Opacity affects everything on the layer, the pixels, the content, and any layer styles you've applied, like drop shadows or glows.
So if you lower opacity, the shadow gets fainter too.
Right. But fill only affects the transparency of the actual layer content, the pixels or the shape or the text itself. It leaves the layer styles at 100% visibility.
Oh, interesting. So the shadow would stay strong even if the main content fades.
Exactly. And as Bullough showed, with certain blending modes like color burn, adjusting fill can give you a very different, often more pleasing blending result compared to just lowering the opacity. It's a more nuanced way to mix layers sometimes.
That's a really useful tip. Okay, back to the layers panel. What about the little padlock icons? The locks.
Right, the locks. Useful for avoiding mistakes. You can lock transparent pixels, so you can only paint where there are already pixels.
So you don't accidentally paint outside the lines of an object.
Kind of, yeah. Or you can lock the image pixels, meaning you can only affect the transparent areas. Then there's lock position, which stops you moving the layer by accident.
I could definitely use that one.
And finally, lock all, which just locks everything on that layer down. No change is possible.
Good safety features.
Yeah.
Then there's the main list of layers itself.
Yep, the layers section, that shows your stacking order. Top layer in the list is the topmost layer in your image. You can drag them up and down to reorder them.
And the little eye icon next to each one.
That's the visibility toggle. Click the eye, the layer disappears. Click it again, it comes back.
Yeah.
Essential for seeing what's what.
Simple but crucial. And at the very bottom of the panel, there are some icons, some tools.
Yeah, that bottom row is for quick actions. There's link layer lets you select multiple layers and link them, so if you move or resize one, they all move or resize together.
Ah, like text in its background shape.
Perfect example.
Hmm.
Then, add a layer style that's for your drop shadows, bevels, glows, strokes, etc. Add layer mask. I definitely need to talk more about masks that are super important.
Okay.
Add an adjustment layer, quick access to creating those. Create a new group, lets you put layers into folders to keep things tidy. Very helpful in complex files.
I can imagine.
Create a new transparent layer, just adds a blank empty layer, and the delete layer trash can icon.
So a lot packed into that panel. Now, those basic operations, creating, deleting, moving, duplicating, hiding, they seem pretty straightforward.
They really are the fundamentals. Click the new layer icon to create one, double-click the name to rename it, drag it to the trash can to delete, drag and drop to move. Control+J or Command+J is the shortcut to duplicate, or drag the layer to the new layer icon. Click the eye to hide show.
Got it. What about that initial background layer? Sometimes images open with that locked layer.
Ah, yeah, the background layer. It has some limitations. You can't easily move it or have transparency on it. To convert it to a normal layer, just double-click it. A box pops up, you can name it, click OK, and it's unlocked.
Or use the menu.
Or layer menu, new layer from background, same result. And you can go the other way too, layer new background from layer, but you can only have one background layer at a time.
Good to know. Okay, linking we mentioned. What about merging?
Merging combines layers. If you select a few layers, right-click and choose Merge Layers, their content all gets combined onto a single layer. It simplifies things, but you lose the separate editability.
And this is different from flattening, right? Rick Peterson's video highlighted that distinction.
Hugely different, yeah. Flattening is the big one. It takes all your visible layers and smushes them down into a single background layer. All your separate layers are gone.
This is very permanent.
Very permanent. It's usually something you do right at the very end, if at all. Merging gives you more control. You can merge just selected layers. Or use Merge Visible, which merges only the layers that currently have their eye icon turned on.
Okay, so merge visible leaves hidden layers alone.
Exactly. Whereas flattening ignores hidden layers and just combines all the visible ones into that one background layer. Rick showed if you flatten too early, then try to move something, you just rip a hole in the image because it's all one piece.
Yeah, definitely a warning to be careful with flattening. Okay, let's dive into layer masks. The HTG photo tutorial seemed to suggest these are incredibly useful.
Oh, they're essential. Layer masks are probably one of the most powerful non-destructive tools. They let you hide parts of a layer without actually erasing anything.
How does that work?
When you add a mask to a layer, you get a second little thumbnail next to the layer's image thumbnail. It's usually white to start with.
White mean?
White reveals. Everything on the layer is visible where the mask is white. Black conceals. If you paint black onto the mask, that part of the layer becomes invisible, letting layers below show through.
So it's like a stencil you paint on.
Exactly. And because you're painting on the mask, not the layer itself, you can always go back, paint white again to reveal it, or paint black somewhere else. No pixels are ever deleted from the actual layer.
That's brilliant. How do you add one?
Easiest way is to select the layer, then click the Add Layer Mask icon. At the bottom of the Layers panel, it looks like a rectangle with a circle inside. That adds a white Reveal All mask.
And you can start painting black on it to hide things.
Yep. Or you can hold Alt, Option on Mac, when you click the icon, and it adds a black Hide All mask, making the layer initially invisible. Then you paint white on the mask to reveal parts of it.
Okay. And you can use more than just black and white.
Shades of gray work, too.
Yeah.
They create partial transparency. So a 50% gray on the mask makes that part of the layer 50% transparent.
And the tutorial mentioned using gradients on masks.
Yeah, that's a classic technique.
Mm-hmm.
If you apply a black to white gradient across the layer mask, it creates a really smooth fade from hidden to visible. Great for blending images together seamlessly.
That sounds really useful. What about cutting things out, like removing backgrounds?
Masks are perfect for that. The tutorial showed how newer versions of Elements have the Select Subject tool. You click that, Elements tries to select the main subject.
Which works pretty well sometimes.
Often surprisingly well. Then you just click the Add Layer Mask button, and boom, the background disappears, because Mask hides everything except your selection.
And you can refine the mask edge afterwards, like for hair?
Absolutely. You can paint directly on the mask with a soft brush, use the Refine Edge tool, or even apply filters like Gaussian blur to the mask itself to soften the edges.
Wow, lots of control. Can you do other things with masks, like turn them off?
Yep, you can right-click the mask thumbnail. You can disable it temporarily. Shift-click the thumbnail does this too. Delete it or apply it, which makes the hiding permanent, merges the mask effect into the layer.
So applying is destructive, like flattening.
In a way, yes. It makes the hidden parts truly gone.
Yeah.
You usually want to keep the mask live as long as possible. You can also unlink the mask from the layer.
Unlink, what does that do?
Normally, the mask and the layer content move together. If you unlink them, click the little chain icon between the thumbnails, you can move the image inside the mask window or move the mask around independently of the image.
Yeah.
Create some cool effects.
Okay, that sounds like something to experiment with. And you can use shapes or selections to create masks too.
Definitely. Make a selection first, then click the Add Layer Mask button. The mask will automatically be white inside your selection and black outside. Even text can be used.
Wow.
Create your text. Then Ctrl straight click, Command click on Mac, right on the T thumbnail of the text layer in the Layers panel. That selects the shape of the text. Then select the layer you want to mask and click Add Layer Mask.
So the layer only shows through where the text was.
Exactly. Like using text as a cookie cutter. Very cool effect. And you can copy masks between layers just by Alt-dragging, Option dragging, the mask thumbnail from one layer to another.
That saves redoing work. Masks seem incredibly versatile.
They really are fundamental to flexible, non-destructive editing in Elements.
Okay, so we've covered a massive amount. The why of layers, the different types, the layers panel, basic operations, that smart object workaround, and now the power of masks, plus opacity versus fill and merging versus flattening. It really feels like layers are the absolute core of Photoshop Elements.
They absolutely are. It's how all these pieces fit together, the layers themselves, the blending molds, the masks, the adjustments, that unlocks the real creative potential. You can isolate things, combine things, adjust things, all independently and reversibly.
It gives you that freedom to try ideas out without penalty, really. If you're just starting or maybe haven't really used layers much, this seems like the thing to focus on learning.
No question. It transforms how you can work with your images.
So maybe the final thought for everyone listening is this. How could really understanding and using layers change your approach? Think about the projects you do or want to do.
Yeah, how could separating elements, blending textures non-destructively, or using masks to selectively reveal parts of images open up possibilities you hadn't even considered before?
Definitely something to ponder. We really encourage you to jump into Elements and just play around with these tools. Add layers, try masks, experiment with blending modes.
You might be surprised what you come up with. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.